Hey everyone, Brandon here from TruckSafe. As of February of 2024, there are over 163,000 CDL drivers in so-called prohibited status in the FMCSA's Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, meaning they are prohibited from operating commercial vehicles due to a drug or alcohol violation in their past. Of those drivers, 76% have not even started the regulatory process through which they could get back to driving. That process, known as return to duty, is meant to rehabilitate drivers through evaluation, education, and follow-up testing. That's what we're discussing in this video, so stay tuned and do us a favor by hitting those like and subscribe buttons below. Before we dive into the return to duty process specifically, let's first discuss who exactly is subject to DOT drug and alcohol testing. If you're even the least bit entrenched in trucking, you'll likely know that as a general proposition, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations apply to those who operate commercial vehicles, or CMVs for short, in interstate commerce. That term, commercial motor vehicle, is therefore the linchpin in determining whether the rules apply. Since nothing is ever easy, the regulations define that term in a couple of different ways. The first is in 49 CFR section 390.5, which dictates the applicability for the vast majority of the federal safety regulations, including things like driver qualification, hours of service, and vehicle maintenance. But there's a more specific definition of that same term that's contained within Part 383 of the safety regulations and applies only in the context of commercial driver's licenses, CDLs, and drug and alcohol testing. This latter definition is more narrow, and so it encompasses a smaller group of commercial drivers, meaning the CDL and drug and alcohol testing requirements apply to a smaller category of drivers than most of the other rules contained within the federal safety regulations. So which drivers are encompassed within the CDL and drug and alcohol testing requirements? Well, looking at 49 CFR section 382.103, we'll see that drug and alcohol testing rules apply to every person and to all employers of such persons who operate a CMV in commerce in any state and are subject to the CDL requirement in Part 383 or the equivalent licensing requirements in Mexico or Canada. All right, so with that in mind, who exactly requires a CDL in the U.S.? Well, the CDL requirements in Part 383 apply to those who operate a commercial motor vehicle, again defined in Part 383, to mean a motor vehicle or combination used in commerce to transport passengers or property if the motor vehicle is a, number one, combination vehicle having a gross combination weight rating or gross combination weight of 26,001 pounds or more, whichever is greater, inclusive of a towed unit with a gross vehicle weight rating or gross vehicle weight of more than 10,000 pounds. So this first category of vehicles encompasses larger combination units of a truck and trailer where the trailer itself weighs more than 10,000 pounds and the combination of the truck and trailer exceeds 26,000 pounds. A tractor trailer is the quintessential example of a combination that falls within this category, but it can also encompass larger pickup trucks with a trailer attached. Next up, in the category of vehicles that require a CDL and whose drivers are subject to drug and alcohol testing, are heavy straight vehicles having a gross vehicle weight rating or gross vehicle weight of 26,001 pounds or more, such as a large box truck, dump truck, or garbage truck. And the last group of vehicles are those that don't fall within either of the two groups that we just mentioned, meaning they don't weigh more than 26,000 pounds, but that are either designed or used to transport 16 or more passengers, including the driver, or are of any size and used to transport placardable quantities of hazmat. Simply stated, if you operate a vehicle or combination that exceeds 26,000 pounds, is used to transport 16 or more passengers, or is hauling a placardable quantity of hazmat in commerce, you most likely need a CDL and are subject to DOT drug and alcohol testing. Now, what happens if a driver violates the drug and alcohol testing rules? Well, Part 382 of the Federal Safety Regulations spells out various types of conduct that amounts to violations of the rules contained within it. Testing positive for drugs or alcohol on a DOT test is certainly a violation, but so is refusing a required test and unlawfully possessing drugs or alcohol. But what happens to a driver when they commit such a violation? All right, so first things first. Per Part 382, the instant a motor carrier is made aware of a driver's violation of the drug and alcohol testing rules, they must immediately remove that driver from performing so-called safety-sensitive functions, driving, for example. From there, the driver remains prohibited from performing safety-sensitive functions until they complete the return to duty process. Now, at this point, the employing motor carrier is also required to provide the driver with a list of substance abuse professionals that they can contact to kick off the return to duty process. But that ends the carrier's regulatory responsibilities, assuming it chooses to part ways with the driver at that point, which is fairly common. Moving on to step 2. Drivers who wish to return to duty following a drug or alcohol testing violation must first visit with the substance abuse professional, or SAP for short. That SAP will evaluate the driver and make recommendations concerning education, treatment, follow-up testing, and aftercare. Once the education or treatment is completed to the SAP's satisfaction, the SAP will prepare a report and prescribe a series of unannounced and observed follow-up tests over the course of the next 1 to 5 years. More specifically, the rules require the SAP to prescribe at least 6 unannounced and observed follow-up tests to be completed within the first 12 months. But they give the SAP discretion to require follow-up testing for up to 5 years, which is pretty common. All right, next up, step 3. Once a driver has completed the SAP process, they must pass a return-to-duty drug and/or alcohol test as applicable to commence commercial driving activities. Per FMCSA guidance, a pre-employment DOT test administered by a new employer can serve as the return-to-duty test, assuming the driver is having to find new employment because of the violation. Otherwise, if the driver will remain at his previous employer, that employer would have to administer a DOT return-to-duty test. And assuming the driver passes that test, they are cleared to begin operating, but remain subject to the follow-up testing schedule prescribed by the SAP. Now, at this point, the driver's drug and alcohol clearinghouse record should reflect that they have passed the required return-to-duty test and are no longer prohibited from operating. Lastly, step 4 is that the driver and their employer are now subject to the follow-up testing schedule. The important part here is that carriers who engage drivers who are subject to a follow-up testing schedule must strictly adhere to that schedule and ensure that the driver completes all of the required tests. Otherwise, the driver will once again be in violation of the drug and alcohol testing rules, as will their employer. Now, once the driver completes all the required follow-up tests, the return-to-duty process is complete. All right, so that's going to wrap up this video. For even more in-depth information about these types of regulatory topics, be sure to check out our innovative online compliance courses for safety managers and for drivers over at trucksafeacademy.com. Also, if you're looking for an easier way to access and understand the federal motor carrier safety regulations, check out eRegs, the first app-based digital version of the regulations over at eregs.app. Lastly, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at trucksafe.com/subscribe and follow us on our various social media pages for the latest highway transportation news and analysis. Thanks for watching.